Welcome to our 100th episode, studying the King James Bible and using the Psalms. So how do we celebrate an episode like this? Well, with a psalm, of course. We're going to be looking at a psalm which includes the line, "Sing unto him, sing psalms unto him." It's Psalm 105. My name is Keith Simons. I'm a Bible teacher from England. I present these talks on how to understand the King James Bible using the Psalms. And so far, we've looked at 90 different Psalms in these talks and 10 parts of Psalm 119, about 50 recorded hours of Psalm talks. Plenty in the archives for you to enjoy and learn from, I trust. So we turn to Psalm 105 for today's talk, and we find out a little about Psalm 105 from a statement in 1 Chronicles chapter 16 and verse 7. This was the day when David brought the Ark of the Covenant, Israel's most sacred object, into Jerusalem, into a tent there, in preparation for the building of the temple. And that verse says, "Then on this day, David delivered first this psalm to thank the Lord into the hand of Asaph and his brethren." And then there follows a version of the first 15 verses of the psalm we're studying today. There are slight differences from the version in the book of Psalms, but they are very small differences, and we often find that in passages of the Bible that repeat, that there are little differences between the repeats of them. We're not sure why those differences are there, but they seem to be deliberate. So, turning to Psalm 105, here there is no ancient title, and we begin with verse 1, and as always, we'll look through the passage verse by verse and word by word. Verse 1, "O give thanks unto the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the people." Yes, David wanted to thank the Lord on this great day. It mattered to him so much that the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence in Israel, should be in Jerusalem, his new capital city. And so he gave thanks to God, and he encouraged everyone around to give thanks to God with him, to call on his name, to seek God, to declare God's deeds, the good things, the wonderful things that God has done. Verse 2, "Sing unto him, sing psalms unto him, talk ye of all his wondrous works." Oh, David believed in praising God with the musical instruments and with the voice, but especially to sing, to declare in music the wonderful things that God has done. Talk ye of all his wondrous works. That could be encouraging us to tell other people about the wonderful things that God has done. But the same words in the Hebrew could mean meditate on all his wondrous works. In other words, think about the wonderful things that God has done. Let them fill your mind and fill your heart. Because when you think about the wonderful things that God has done, well, then you will, verse 3, glory ye in his holy name. Glory, boast if you like, declare boldly the name of God is holy. Declare how wonderful and how perfect God is. Proud people, of course, proud people boast in themselves. They boast of what they've achieved. They boast of their own greatness. But God's people boast that God is good and wonderful and perfect in every way. And I've used the word boast for glory there, but another word for glory in that context is rejoice. And we see that in the second half of the verse. Let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. Other people, wicked people, well, they might be happy for a moment, but they have no proper reason to be happy. They have no proper reason to be happy or to rejoice about the evil things that they do. No, it's those who seek the Lord, those who desire God to work in their lives, those who follow after God, their hearts should rejoice. Not just happy songs in their mouths or happy words in their mouths, but deep in the heart of them there is rejoicing because they serve a good God. Verse 4, seek the Lord and his strength. His strength. That seems to be a name for the Ark of the Covenant, that most sacred box which contained the Ten Commandments as an illustration, or rather as evidence of God's relationship, his covenant, his promises to Israel. So the author of our Psalm, David, is telling us, as you pray, turn towards God's sacred tent, turn towards the Ark of the Covenant. Seek God's face evermore. Always look to God. Look to God and the things that he's done. Look to God and his work in the lives of Israel's people. And verse 5, remember his marvellous works that he hath done, his wonders and the judgments of his mouth. Verse 6, O ye seed of Abraham his servant, ye children of Jacob his chosen. The seed of Abraham, the people whose family came from the family of Abraham. The children of Jacob, again, the people who came from the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this is to Israel's people, the nation that came from the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what must they do? Remember his marvellous works. Remember his wonders, his judgments. Remember how he set your nation free from being slaves in Egypt. Remember the good things that he did, the miracles under Moses to set the people free. He's a good God. He cares about his people. Verse 7. He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth. Yes, our God is the judge of the whole world. All the people on earth are responsible to him for the light and for the knowledge that he's given to them. God is the God who sets up rulers and removes them from power, who acts against powerful forces to set his people free. He did that when he rescued Israel's people from Egypt. He does that again and again as he acts in this world to look after his people. And Israel's people had and have their covenant with God, God's promises to Israel. Verse 8, he hath remembered his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations. Or when God makes his promises, they last for 1,000 generations. In other words, they last forever. And God remembers that covenant. He doesn't forget like a person forgets that he's made a promise. No, God remembers the promises that he's made. He remembers the word that he has declared, and he keeps his promises. Oh, sometimes we go through troubles and difficulties and we wonder, does God keep his promises? And then God acts in power to save his people, and we know for sure God has remembered his covenant. Let's think about that covenant which God made with Abraham. I've heard people say, and maybe you have too, that God's covenant with Abraham was really only for the one man, Abraham. And it just refers to the fact that the Messiah, the Christ, would eventually come from Abraham's family. But no, God's covenant with Abraham was for his family after him. And this is declared very clearly in these next 3 verses. Let me read you verses 9 to 11. Which covenant he made with Abraham, and his oath unto Isaac, and confirmed the same unto Jacob for a law, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant, saying, Unto you will I give the land of Canaan, the lot of your inheritance. So this covenant, which is also called an oath or a law in this passage, these promises that God made, he made them to Abraham, and he promised them to Isaac, and he confirmed it to Jacob and to Israel, to the nation of Israel, a promise, a covenant that would last forever, saying, Unto thee will I give the land of Canaan. God was giving to his people the promised land. The promised land to be their home forever, the home for their families, because he had chosen them. The lot of your inheritance. The word lot there translates a Hebrew word which means a measuring line or a cord. You'll still see that today when builders and surveyors are at work. The best way to mark off a plot of land is to take a measuring line or a cord and stretch it between 2 sticks, because then you get a straight line. And that's the way they'll mark a boundary or the edge of where a building is to be. And here, the lot, the line of your inheritance, means that God had chosen a specific place in the world, the country formerly called Canaan, which he gave to Israel's people. And God promised that initially to Abraham when, verse 12, they were but a few men in number, yea, very few, and strangers in it. It was only 70 people who went to Egypt at the time of Joseph, who were the family of Abraham at that time and would become the great nation of Israel. Just 70 people, and less than that in years before. So few people, and they were strangers in that land. They didn't own that land. When Abraham needed a place to bury his wife Sarah, he had to pay and negotiate with the Hittites for a field with a cave in it to use for burial. He owned none of that land. They were people, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, who wandered one place to another, nomads, living in tents. They went, verse 13, from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another people. And as they travelled through the land of Canaan, as foreigners in that land, but as heirs of that land because of God's promise, it was then that God suffered, old word for he allowed, verse 14, he suffered no man to do them wrong, yea, he reproved kings for their sakes. God wouldn't allow people to harm them. He even spoke against kings in order to support his holy people, this family whom he had chosen. So it was in Genesis 20. And this is a passage that seems to be referred to in verse 15 of our psalm. Let me read you verse 15 first, saying, "Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm." So Abraham at one time went into a place called Gerar in the Philistine country, and because he thought that people would be attracted to his wife Sarah, he asked her to say that she was his sister. And the king of that land, Abimelech, thinking that Sarah was Abraham's sister, took her into his harem, into his palace as a wife. And God stopped Abimelech before he could sleep with Sarah. And he said to the king, King Abimelech, "Now therefore," this is Genesis 20 and verse 7, "Now therefore restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. And if thou restore her not, know thou that thou shalt surely die, thou and all that are thine," because he'd taken for himself Abraham's wife. And God said in the words of our psalm, "Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm." Mine anointed, my Christ's, my Messiah's. That's what that word means, the Hebrew word Messiah there. It was a title for the kings of Israel. It meant someone who had been anointed to separate them for a special task. Why, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Israel's people were like kings, because God set apart that family and that nation for himself, just as the kings of Israel were later set apart from other people by the anointing of oil. So Abraham, Isaac, the nation of Israel, were set apart from other nations, and God said of them to defend them, "Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm." In the verse I've just read from Genesis, Abraham is actually called a prophet. But how can Israel's people be called my prophets? Well, because God reveals himself in a special way to a prophet. And God revealed himself in a special way to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the nation of Israel. God taught them about worshipping him and serving him and his laws and his standards. He revealed to them all kinds of things which the other nations did not have. So we move on to verse 16, and here we start with a part of the psalm that doesn't appear in the passage in 1 Chronicles, which we looked at earlier. But the psalm continues, and it continues with the history of Israel at the time of Jacob, and in particular of his son Joseph. Verse 16, moreover, in addition, that means, he, God, called for a famine upon the land. He brake the whole staff of bread. Okay, so a famine, when there's not enough food. God, it says, break the whole staff of bread. The word staff is there used as a sort of word picture. A staff is a stick or a crutch, we would call it today. It's the thing someone who can't walk very well leans on as they walk. So it's the staff that supports the person, and where it says he brake the whole staff of bread, it means that the bread which supported people's lives, that was no longer there. So there was a real shortage of food at the time of Jacob, but God had already provided for Jacob's family, and he did it by Joseph, Jacob's son. Verse 17, He, God, sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant. Yes, Joseph, the one of Jacob's 12 sons, who his brothers hated. He was taken, and they put him in a pit. And then people passing by dragged him out of the pit, and they sold him for a slave, and he was taken to Egypt. And in Egypt he became a servant to an important official. But then he was arrested for a crime he was not guilty of. And then Joseph really suffered. Verse 18, whose feet they hurt with fetters. He was laid in iron. In other words, iron was placed around his legs so that he couldn't run away. He was trapped there in prison and suffered so much until, verse 19, the time that his word came. The word of the Lord tried him. Oh, God had given dreams to Joseph to show him what would happen in the future. And that dream was a promise to Joseph, a promise that he would be exalted, that he would become important, that he would be used by God to save the whole world from suffering in this famine, that he would become a ruler in Egypt. But until that time came, the word of the Lord tried him. The word tried there means to test or to refine. Like, how do you make gold pure? You get the ore out of the ground, or silver, and the gold is mixed in with other substances. How do you get the gold out? How do you get the silver out? In the hottest fire. You burn the hottest fire that you possibly can to clean and to purify your precious metal. And so it was that when Joseph was suffering there, the word of God tested him. Those dreams which he'd had as a child, they were testing him and bringing him to the point where God wanted him to be, where he could take on the authority which God gave to him. Verses 20 to 22, the king sent and loosed him, that's Joseph, even the ruler of the people, and let him go free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his substance, to bind his princes at his pleasure and teach his senators wisdom. Oh yes, the time came for the fulfillment of God's promises to Joseph. And when that time came, even the king of Egypt had to act. Verse 14, he reproved kings for their sakes, saying, touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm. Yes, even the king of Egypt had to listen to the word of the Lord by Joseph. The king sent and loosed him. He let him go free and made him lord of his house. Here, Lord without a capital letter, meaning the master, the ruler of all his substance. In other words, the one who had charge of all his possessions, the most important person apart from the king in all of Egypt. Joseph had power to bind his princes at his pleasure. To bind means to put them in prison. He had power over powerful and mighty people. And it was Joseph who taught the king of Egypt's senators, wisdom. It was Joseph who showed real wisdom to the senators. That means the old men who were the advisors to the kings of Egypt. Those old men didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to prepare for the famine. But Joseph knew. Joseph had wisdom which God had given to him. Do you remember that first one of Joseph's dreams, when he saw his brothers binding sheaves together in the field? Well, at that time, Israel's people kept animals. It wasn't grain that they worked on. But Joseph, with wisdom from God, saw that by keeping grain in the good years, there'd be food available for the years of famine, the years of suffering. This was all preparation that God made to save people from the famine at the time of Joseph. And that was when, verse 23, Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned or lived temporarily in the land of Ham. The land of Ham is another name in this psalm for Egypt, because its people came from the descendants of Ham, who was a son of Noah. And Jacob came and lived there. And when it says at the beginning of that verse, Israel also came into Egypt, it's referring to Jacob by the name God gave him, but it also seems to be referring to Israel's people, the nation that came from the family of Jacob. They all came into Egypt at that time, and they did well there, and they lived there many years, and they became strong as a nation. They went in as a family, and they became a nation. Verse 24, and he, God, increased his people greatly, and made them stronger than their enemies. O Israel's people, still living in Egypt, in the decades, the generations after Joseph, they became a mighty nation and stronger than their enemies who opposed them. And Egypt's people should have welcomed them, because didn't God say to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you? They could have had the blessing from that. But Egypt's people turned to evil ways and evil thoughts. And when people turn to wickedness, sometimes God will act against them, but sometimes God will allow them to act in that way. His judgment is still against them. At the proper time, his punishment will be against them for their evil acts unless they repent. But God sometimes gives people over to their evil thoughts. And when Egypt's people became jealous of Israel's people, when they started to deal with them in a cruel and nasty way, that was when, verse 25, he, God, turned their heart to hate his people, to deal subtly with his servants. That is, God turned the heart of Egypt's people to hate the Israelites, God's own people. God allowed them to move to an attitude of hatred where they made Israel's people into slaves. They dealt subtly with God's servants. Subtly means deceitfully. They acted in a cruel and an evil manner to gain control over Israel's people. They turned Israel's people into slaves. But God had not forgotten his people. Hadn't God given that warning, verse 15? Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm. Verse 26, he, God, sent Moses his servant, and Aaron, that's the brother of Moses, whom he had chosen. They shewed his signs among them, and wonders in the land of Ham. So this is Moses and Aaron, his brother and his spokesman, Aaron became the chief priest of Israel. And they showed God's signs in Egypt. Reference there again to the land of Ham, to refer to Egypt, where wonders took place. But these are not happy wonders, like we often mean when we use the word miracles to mean good things. No, these wonders were judgments against Egypt's people, the 10 plagues of Egypt. And now we have a recital of various ones of those plagues, not in order, but just recording them one by one. Verse 28, He, God, sent darkness and made it dark, and they rebelled not against his word. He turned their waters into blood, that was first plague, and slew their fish. Their land brought forth frogs in abundance, in the chambers of their kings, even in the private rooms of Pharaoh's palace, those frogs came with the plague of frogs. Oh, more of these plagues, more of these troubles. Verse 31, He spake, and there came divers sorts of flies, different sorts of flies, we would say today, and lice in all their coasts. He gave them hail for rain, and flaming fire in their land, lightning and fire, and hail, heavy hailstones that cause destruction and desolation. Verse 33, He smote their vines also, their fruit bushes, the kind of plant on which grapes grow, and their fig trees, and brake the trees of their coasts. He spoke, and the locusts came, and caterpillars, and that without number. Locusts are also called grasshoppers. When we see them in ones and twos, we call them grasshoppers. But when they come in vast, vast numbers and cover the whole surface of the land and eat up all the plants, then we say there is a plague of locusts. And did eat up all the herbs in their land. Today the word herbs means plants with a special smell, a special use, a special fragrance like lavender and thyme. But no, herbs in the King James Bible here means green plants. All these locusts and caterpillars, these insects, ate up everything that was green, every plant that was growing in their land was eaten up and destroyed. And they devoured the fruit of their ground, so that their harvest failed, so that the productive part of their land was destroyed. And then the last plague, the most dreadful of all the plagues. Verse 36, He, God, smote also all the firstborn in their land, the chief of all their strength. The firstborn, the first son in every family, died in that last plague. Those firstborn are called the chief of all their strength because the first son in a family should be the strongest in the family. He should be the leader of the family. But it was that generation which was removed from Egypt, all those people dying in every household. How dreadful, because the people hated Israel's people. Oh, how God had warned, touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm. He had set apart Israel's people for himself. How terrible it was to be the nation which tried to grab Israel's people from God. So God rescued Israel's people from Egypt, and with what joy. Verse 37, He, God, brought them forth also with silver and gold, and there was not one feeble person among their tribes. No, God made his people strong for their journey through the desert, and he provided for them. He provided for them with silver and with gold. Egypt's people were so desperate that Israel's people should leave that they actually paid them to leave. That's why, verse 38, Egypt was glad when they departed, for the fear of them fell upon them. The respect of Israel's people had at last fallen upon the survivors in Egypt, and the survivors of the 10 plagues respected Israel's people, and they were glad that at last Israel's people had left. And how God looked after Israel's people through the desert on the way to the land of Canaan, the land promised to them. In other Psalms we'll record how Israel's people rebelled against God in the desert. But this isn't the purpose of David as he writes this psalm of thanksgiving. It's to thank God for everything that he did for the benefit of Israel's people. And so David's mind as he writes this is full of joy to remember the miracles and wonders that God did to help his people at that time. Verse 39, he spread a cloud for a covering and fire to give light in the night. Oh, they were in the desert. It would have been so harsh for them in the hot sun, but God spread his cloud over them day after day for the 40 years in the wilderness. And at night they had light, because that pillar of cloud turned into a pillar of fire to light their way, to keep them safe. And God provided for them. Verse 40, the people asked. They asked in rebellion sometimes, but David records only the good thing. They asked, and he brought quails. Birds came down upon their camp to provide them with meat, and God satisfied them with the bread of heaven, the manna, which appeared by miracle each day in their camp, except on the Sabbath day, when he'd provided a double portion on the previous day to satisfy them, to feed them and to feed them enough, to feed them well. In the desert there should be not enough food. They had plenty. In the desert there should be not enough water. Well, God provided. Verse 41, he opened the rock and the waters gushed out. They ran in the dry places like a river. Oh, God directed Moses to touch the rock with his staff, and out flowed water. God was providing for his people. Why did he provide for them? So generously that the water ran in the dry places like a river. Because, verse 42, God's promise, his covenant, had not been forgotten. God remembered his holy promise. And Abraham, his servant, verse 43, and he brought forth his people with joy, and his chosen with gladness. O Israel's people, the chosen people, the nation that God has set apart for himself. How gladly they went forward when they were serving God, when they were obedient to God. How gladly, years afterwards, David was when the Ark of the Covenant was brought into his capital city, into Jerusalem, in the centre, the heart of the promised land. God had, verse 44, he'd given to them the lands of the heathen, and they inherited the labour of the people. The heathen means foreigners. At the time God brought Israel's people into Canaan, he also made his judgment against the evil deeds of the people who were living there. That's how God provided Canaan for Israel's people. God gave them the land that those heathens formerly had, and they inherited the labour of the people. They lived in houses that they themselves had not built. They gained fields that they themselves had not worked on, because God provided for them. And why did God do this wonderful thing? Because he wanted them to serve him forever. Verse 45, that they might observe his statutes and keep his laws. Different words there in the Hebrew for observe and keep, but with the same meaning. Guarding, keeping safe, keeping as the most precious thing in their lives, God's laws, God's statutes, the instructions that God had given for their lives. Oh, God did wonderful things for his people back then. He'd shown his love, he'd shown his kindness, and David saw that that kindness had not ended. David saw as the Ark of the Covenant came to its special tent in Jerusalem that this was a time for giving thanks to God. And so he concludes, "Praise ye the Lord." The Hebrew word is hallelujah. Well, this has been our 100th episode, and I do hope, if you haven't been tempted to write to me and say hello so far, that this time you will write to me. My name is Keith Simons. My email address 333kjv@gmail.com. You won't go on any mailing lists. I would love to hear what part of the world you're from, and if you're in America, which of the states you're in. Please write to me 333kjv@gmail.com. I'm now going to read you the whole of Psalm 105. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord. Call upon his name. Make known his deeds among the people. Sing unto him. Sing praises unto him. Talk ye of all his wondrous works. Glory ye in his holy name. Let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his face evermore. Remember his marvellous works that he hath done, his wonders and the judgments of his mouth, O ye seed of Abraham, his servant, ye children of Jacob, his chosen. He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth. He hath remembered his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, which covenant he made with Abraham, and his oath unto Isaac, and confirmed the same unto Jacob for a law, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant, saying, Unto thee will I give the land of Canaan, the lot of your inheritance. When they were but a few men in number, yea, very few, and strangers in it. When they went from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another people, he suffered no man to do them wrong, yea, he reproved kings for their sakes, saying, Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm. Moreover, he called for a famine upon the land. He brake the whole staff of bread. He sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant, whose feet they hurt with fetters. He was laid in iron until the time that his word came. The word of the Lord tried him. The king sent and loosed him, even the ruler of the people, and let him go free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his substance, to bind his princes at his pleasure and teach his senators wisdom. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. And he increased his people greatly, and made them stronger than their enemies. He turned their heart to hate his people, to deal subtly with his servants. He sent Moses his servant and Aaron, whom he had chosen. They shewed his signs among them, and wonders in the land of Ham. He sent darkness, and made it dark, and they rebelled not against his word. He turned their waters into blood and slew their fish. Their land brought forth frogs in abundance in the chambers of their kings. He spake, and there came divers sorts of flies and lice in all their coasts. He gave them hail for rain and flaming fire in their land. He smote their vines also, and their fig trees, and brake the trees of their coasts. He spake, and the locusts came, and caterpillars, and that without number, and did eat up all the herbs in their land, and devoured the fruit of their ground. He smote also all the firstborn in their land, the chief of all their strength. He brought them forth also with silver and gold, and there was not one feeble person among their tribes. Egypt was glad when they departed, for the fear of them fell upon them. He spread a cloud for a covering, and fire to give light in the night. The people asked, and he brought quails, and satisfied them with the bread of heaven. He opened the rock, and the waters gushed out. They ran in the dry places like a river. For he remembered his holy promise, and Abraham his servant. And he brought forth his people with joy, and his chosen with gladness, and gave them the lands of the heathen, and they inherited the labour of the people, that they might observe his statutes and keep his laws. Praise ye the Lord.